That one fruit company, to protect its bottom line, convinced the CIA to overthrow a democratically elected government. What if I told you it plunged a nation into 36 years of civil war and darkness? This is the wild and completely true story of how the United Fruit Company destroyed a democracy for profit. So how did things get to this? To find out, we would have to go back in time. 1871. The Costa Rican jungle is an impenetrable wall of green. But Henry Meigs, an American rail king with a vulture's instinct for profit, sees a line through the chaos. The contract is signed. The mission: forge a steel path to the Caribbean. But the jungle doesn't take kindly to invaders. When Meigs dies in 77, the empire falls to his nephew, Miner Keith. He is young, hungry, and standing on a mountain of debt and dead laborers. Keith needs a way to feed his army of workers without breaking the bank. He looks away from the steel and toward the soil. He begins an experiment: a cheap, fast-growing fruit to keep the machines running. He was building a railroad. He ended up building a dynasty. The banana wasn't just food. It was a weapon of commerce. Miner Keith's experiment didn't just feed his workers. It seduced them. And then, it seduced the world. By the 1890s, the tracks weren't just moving people. They were moving green gold. Keith realized the railroad was merely the skeleton. The fruit was the flesh. In 1899, Keith merges his interests to form the United Fruit Company. On paper, it's an agricultural firm. In reality, it's a shadow government. The company controls a staggering 42% of Guatemala's land, though it only farms a small fraction of it. It's basically a state within a state. They own the ports. They own the rails. They own the telegraph lines. If you wanted to speak to the world from Central America, you did it through United Fruit. The company became known as El Pulpo, the octopus. Its tentacles reached into every Capitol building, every palace, and every police station. A fruit company was now dictating the fate of nations. This empire wasn't built on innovation. It was built on the handshake of a tyrant. In Guatemala, Jorge Ubico treated the country like a private estate. To United Fruit, he was the perfect partner. He handed over vast tracts of ancestral land, erased their tax bills, and ensured that labor laws were flexible. It was a closed loop of corruption. The company kept the ruling class wealthy. The ruling class kept the company untouchable. This was the birth of a new political species: the Banana Republic. A nation where the flag belongs to the people, but the fate belongs to a boardroom in Boston. For decades, the system was a well-oiled machine. But in 1944, the machine hit a wall. The people of Guatemala were done being a line item on a balance sheet. The revolution wasn't just coming, it was already at the gates. 1944. The fever breaks. In a surge of collective defiance, the people of Guatemala tear down the old guard. They call it the 10 Years of Spring. For a decade, the air in Guatemala changes. Labor unions are legalized. The press is unshackled. For the first time in history, the ballot box isn't a formality, it's a weapon. In 1951, that democracy finds its voice in a soldier-turned-reformer. A man of quiet intensity and dangerous conviction. Jacobo Arbenz. He didn't just want a seat at the table. He wanted to flip the table over. To the people, he was a savior. To the boardrooms in Boston, he was a ghost story come to life. The octopus had finally met the one man it couldn't buy. And in the shadows of the Cold War, the spring was about to meet a very cold winter. Jacobo Arbenz wasn't a radical firebrand. He was a soldier with a blueprint. He didn't want to burn the system down, he wanted to build a better one. His vision was simple: take Guatemala from the Middle Ages and drag it into the 20th century. He planned to build government ports to bypass the company's docks. He planned to pave highways to break the company's rails. But his biggest target wasn't the concrete. It was the dirt. In a nation where peasants starved in the shadows of vast, unused plantations, Arbenz saw a moral and economic failure. United Fruit was sitting on millions of acres of the nation's best soil, keeping it empty just to keep it theirs. To Arbenz, the path to a modern, independent state was blocked by a single obstacle: the monopoly. And in 1952, he picked up a pen and signed the law that would declare war on the octopus. Decree 900, the agrarian reform, the law that didn't just demand the land, it demanded a future. June 1952. Decree 900. On paper, it was the definition of moderate. It wasn't a seizure, it was a purchase. The government didn't want the company's productive farms. They wanted the waste. Millions of acres held in reserve, gathering dust while families starved. Arbenz's plan was a capitalist dream: turn peasants into landowners and landowners into consumers. The government would buy the land back, offering low-interest loans to the poor to start their own farms. It was a cycle designed to lift a nation out of the dirt. And here was the genius, or the death sentence. The price the government paid was based on the company's own tax filings. If United Fruit had lowballed the value for years to avoid taxes, they were about to be paid exactly what they said it was worth. In the boardroom in Boston, the irony wasn't appreciated. The moderate law had just become an existential threat to the bottom line. And the octopus was about to stop being a business and start being a spy agency. But for United Fruit, this was a declaration of war. The company's entire business model depended on owning way more land than it actually used, which allowed it to block competitors and keep land prices artificially low. Now, the Guatemalan government was going to take a big piece of that unused land and give it back to the people. But here's where things got really messy: compensation. The Arbenz government offered to pay United Fruit based on the value the company itself had declared on its 1952 tax forms. It was a clever and fair move. But United Fruit had been deliberately undervaluing its land for years to dodge Guatemalan taxes. They had valued the land at just over $1 million. When the government offered them that amount in compensation, the company was furious. They ran to the U.S. State Department and demanded nearly $16 million. When Guatemala refused, United Fruit decided that if it couldn't win in a court of law, it would win in the court of public opinion and in the back rooms of Washington, D.C. United Fruit knew they couldn't win a debate about land taxes. So they changed the subject. They didn't just hire lawyers. They hired the architects of the American mind. It was the height of the Cold War. Paranoia was the national currency. And the company began to spend it. They launched a campaign that was as surgical as it was cynical. Stories began to appear in the New York Times, the Christian Science Monitor, and Time magazine. The narrative was always the same: Arbenz wasn't a reformer. He was a Soviet puppet. A red infection in America's backyard. They produced propaganda films with titles that sounded like B-movie thrillers. The message was stripped down and terrifying. If the Kremlin controlled the bananas, they controlled the hemisphere. It was the big lie in action. By the time they were done, the American public didn't see a man trying to build a highway. They saw a Soviet beachhead. And in Washington, the brothers who ran the CIA were listening very, very closely. The propaganda was a masterclass in fiction. In reality, the Soviet presence in Guatemala was a ghost. Zero influence, zero weapons, zero threat. But in Washington, facts were secondary to friendship. And United Fruit's connections didn't just reach the halls of power, they were the power. Meet the Dulles brothers. Before they were the architects of American foreign policy, they were partners at Sullivan and Cromwell, the powerhouse law firm that represented United Fruit for decades. It wasn't just a conflict of interest. It was a closed loop. The men deciding if Guatemala was a threat were the same men who had spent years protecting the company's profits. For the Dulles brothers, the line between national security and corporate security had vanished. The octopus didn't need to lobby the government. It was the government. It wasn't just a political alliance. It was a family affair. At the State Department, we have John Foster Dulles. He didn't just like United Fruit, he had spent decades as their senior partner at Sullivan and Cromwell. He had personally sat across the table from Guatemalan officials to negotiate the very land deals Arbenz was now tearing up. Next door at the CIA sits his brother, Alan. He wasn't just a lawyer for the company, he sat on their board of directors. For Alan Dulles, a threat to the banana was a threat to his own legacy. The rot went deeper. The Assistant Secretary of State for Inter-American Affairs, tied by blood to a former United Fruit president. And in the Oval Office, the gatekeeper to the president himself, Eisenhower's personal secretary, was married to the man running United Fruit's massive propaganda machine. This wasn't a government evaluating a foreign crisis. This was a law firm with its own army, using the American flag to protect its oldest client. The trap was set. The PR had worked. The connections were locked. All that was left was for the CIA to pull the trigger. August 1953. The talk of land reform and legalities ends. In a quiet room in the White House, President Eisenhower gives the nod. The goal was stripped of all its complexity. No more debates. No more diplomatic cables. The mission was simple: terminate the presidency of Jacobo Arbenz. To do it, the CIA was handed a blank check. An official budget of $2.7 million, equivalent to nearly $30 million today. This wasn't for bullets and bombs, at least not yet. This was a budget for the destruction of a man's reputation. For psychological warfare. For political subversion. The agency wasn't just planning an invasion, they were choreographing a nightmare. The CIA's voice of liberation was about to hit the airwaves. The 10 years of spring was about to meet its first frost. Every coup needs a face, a hero to sell to the masses. The CIA found theirs in Carlos Castillo Armas, a disgruntled, exiled colonel with a thin mustache and a long-standing grudge. To the world, he would be the liberator. In reality, he was a ghost in a CIA safe house. In the jungles of Honduras and Nicaragua, the agency began assembling his army. It was a tiny, desperate force of just 480 men. Not enough to take a city, let alone a country. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and largely untrained. But the CIA didn't need them to win a real war. They just needed them to look like they were winning one. While Armas's men polished their American rifles, the CIA was preparing the real invasion, one that would happen not on the ground, but over the airwaves. On June 15, 1954, the CIA's most powerful weapon went live. It wasn't a bomb. It was a radio station, La Voz de la Liberación. From a secret transmitter in the jungle, the CIA began broadcasting a masterpiece of fiction. They didn't report the news, they manufactured it. Listeners heard the sounds of massive battles that weren't happening. They heard reports of entire army divisions deserting Arbenz, divisions that were actually sitting in their barracks, confused. They didn't report the news, they manufactured it. The CIA even jammed the government's own frequencies. Arbenz tried to tell his people the truth, but his voice was drowned out by a wall of American-made static. While the radio sowed panic, the Air Force arrived. Two P-47 Thunderbolts, piloted by Americans, screamed over Guatemala City. They didn't drop a carpet of bombs. They dropped blocks of TNT into open fields and leaflets into the streets. It was a psychological blitzkrieg. The CIA wasn't trying to kill the army, they were trying to convince the army that they were already dead. June 18, 1954. The invasion finally begins. Castillo Armas and his tiny band of exiles crawl across the border like a funeral procession. Militarily, it's a joke. A few hundred men against a national army. But the CIA isn't fighting a war of attrition. They're staging a premiere. High above the clouds, the real liberators arrive. Unmarked P-47 Thunderbolts, piloted by Americans, scream over the Capitol. They aren't looking for military targets. They're looking for symbols. To the people below, it looks like the end of the world. The radio says the army has defected. The sky is falling. The oil reserves, the lifeblood of the city, are in flames. The psychological impact is absolute. It doesn't matter that the army at the border is a phantom. In the mind of Guatemala, the coup is already over. The CIA's masterpiece was complete. They hadn't defeated the Guatemalan army, they had paralyzed it. Spooked by the voice of liberation and terrified that the U.S. Marines were just over the horizon, the generals made a choice. They chose the octopus over the president. June 27, 1954. Jacobo Arbenz stands before a microphone for the final time. The spring is over. He tells his people the truth, that this was never about communism. It was about the fruit, the land, and the cold hand of a superpower. Before he can finish, the signal is killed. The voice of the revolution is silenced. He fled into the cold shadow of asylum. The 10 years of spring had lasted exactly 1 decade. The coup was a success. The monopoly had won. The CIA celebrated a clean victory. In Washington, the Dulles brothers toasted to a job well done. But in Guatemala, the spring didn't just end, it was buried. The new regime didn't waste time. The land reform was repealed. The empty fields were handed back to the octopus. The unions were outlawed. The capitalist experiment was replaced by a corporate dictatorship. Castillo Armas was the first in a long line of military rulers who would govern by the shadow of the bayonet. The democratic voice Arbenz tried to build was silenced by a decades-long civil war that would eventually claim over 200,000 lives. United Fruit got its land back. The Dulles brothers protected their clients. And the term "banana republic" was no longer a political theory. It was a death sentence for a generation. We were told it was about the Cold War. But in the end, it was always about the fruit. The 1954 coup was more than a localized tragedy. It was a proof of concept. It proved that with enough PR, enough Red Scare, paranoia, and the right friends in high places, a corporation could buy the foreign policy of the United States. It showed that democracy was secondary to the bottom line. Guatemala became the dark playbook. From the streets of Tehran to the palaces of Chile, the blueprint remained the same: destabilize, deceive, depose. The 10 years of spring was buried in a shallow grave, but its ghost still haunts the hemisphere. Because when a fruit company can convince a superpower to extinguish a democracy, the banana republic isn't just a term. It's a warning. We see them every day, stacked in neat, yellow rows at the grocery store. Simple. Ordinary. But the price of that banana was never just a few cents. In Guatemala, the price was a stolen spring. It was the right to vote, the right to land, and the right to a future. It was a cost paid in blood, in disappeared fathers and shattered villages, a debt that has been compounding for 70 years. History isn't just something that happened. It's something we're still living in. And every time we peel back the skin of the ordinary, we find a legacy that is anything but. This is the kind of history we can't afford to forget. If you agree, consider subscribing and sharing this video. We're dedicated to uncovering the hidden stories that quietly shape our world. Let us know in the comments what other histories you think need to be told. Thanks for watching.